Content warning. This video will touch up on the topic of death, including animal and human death, so listener discretion is advised. I love the macabre and all things dark and horrifying. One of my dreams is to be able to someday explore abandoned locations, maybe even get some friends to go ghost hunting with me. I grew up watching ghost hunting shows and zombie films, and am slowly dabbling into creating more horror stories myself. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone to learn that I'm into vulture culture as well, and I've gained a decent collection of bones and oddities, as well as some good stories for how I obtained them. But before we begin, the art for today's video. I played Elden Ring around when it first came out, but due to some life situations, I wasn't able to actually beat it until earlier this year. I'm incredibly excited for the DLC that's coming out for it, so I went and I drew a fan art of a character who I'm hoping will get more in-game screen time, Mikola the Unalloyed. He's probably my most favorite character besides Morgott and Ronnie, and I hope FromSoft will do more stuff with him in the future. His presence in the game is very lacking despite being such a fascinating character. Now on to the video. I do want to clarify beforehand that I do not hunt and kill animals for my bones. In fact, I've never hunted before in my life, or killed an animal before. I'm a firm believer that if you're going to go hunting, not only should you use the whole animal, you shouldn't kill animals just for one part of it. I also am against owning human bones, period, as it is hard to find out where they are from and leads to the topic of grave robbing. And I don't feel comfortable owning a human bone that could have come from someone who was murdered for the black market or something. I'm also against acquiring bones and fur of endangered animals, as well as feathers. I love animals, but I don't want to hurt them to get my bones, and I'd rather not have the bones if that's the only way I could get them. Best to find my bones naturally, by going into the woods and looking for them, or from a trusted source. This is my long-winded way of saying that none of my bones and oddities were killed specifically for the sake of me having their remains. They were all founded by me or gifted to me by trusted friends and family, and none of them have any interest in the hobby, but if they do, they also share my feelings on ethical bone collecting. But even with my own morals when it comes to bones, I have some wild stories about collecting them, my most wild one involving me being followed in the woods. We'll get to that story later. Right now, let's start with my earliest story. It doesn't involve my bone collection, but it fits the topic of the video, and it's a pretty funny story. Now this happened when I was really little, about 5, maybe 6, and I only remember pieces of it, but I was told this story from this relative before. When I was little, I lived with my mom at my grandparents'. My mom and dad are not together, and I would spend weekends with my dad. He got remarried to my little brother's mom, who at the time was also my stepmother. She was coming by to pick me up and my older brother to go to her dad's for the weekend, and I was outside my grandparents' driveway. And on that driveway there was a dead lizard. And I remember it because it was big in my tiny hands and it was missing its tail. And I remember putting it in my lunchbox, but from there what happened was a bit fuzzy, and I got picked up from my grandparents' place and taken to my dad's place, and then my stepmom took my lunchbox away. I remember my stepmom screaming when she opened it up, but nothing else after that. Later when she was visiting my little brothers at my dad's for the holidays, she would have told me the story. Apparently I had asked her to take the lizard to the vet, because I thought it was sick, as a 5 or 6 year old does. It should be a surprise why I don't flinch at handling dead things. I used to bury roadkill I found on the side of the road by kicking stuff over it when I was in middle school, and when I took anatomy in my senior year of high school, it was the first time I ever did dissections for a science class, so I was ready to jump into the messier parts of those lessons. I am not bothered by gore at all. Which leads me to finding my very first bone and starting my vulture culture collection. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was walking to work when I saw on the side of the road a half-decayed raccoon skull complete with the jaw, but lacking anything else for the rest of the body. It was sitting next to a path through the woods I took to work every day, and I was curious about it. At this point I was already wanting to collect bones, and I followed people and was friends with people who did it already, but I never got the chance to actually collect any myself. You see, there's a ton of wildlife where I live, despite it being close between 2 major cities, so there's a lot of roadkill, mainly deer, but my town is very good at cleaning it up, most of the time, and I would usually be gone by the next day. But since this was a forest pass, I guess they haven't gotten to it yet. Since I didn't have anything I could use to take it with me, I left it and went to work, but the skull was on my mind through my whole shift. On my break, I looked up animal remains collecting laws, and talked with some friends as to what to do with it. They gave me advice, and finally I decided to take a trash bag and some disposable gloves and grab it on my way home, planning on cleaning the skull when I got there. And I did just that. Until some workmen that came by to fix our flooded basement went and destroyed it. I left it outside by the basement window, and I guess a container full of hydrogen peroxide with a skull in it freaked them out because they smashed it. I was upset, but I did end up getting a new raccoon skull later, even if it wasn't one I cleaned myself. That was a very upsetting day for me. So just before the pandemic, I left that job to go work at my previous job. I won't say what it was, but it was right next door to the older job, and they were not surprised to see me go. The place was starting its decline of going out of business, and the pandemic pushed it over that edge. I came by occasionally to say hi to my old coworkers as the store went out of business, as I did like them, and I did like working with them. And my manager from that job one day said, "Daryl, I gotta show you something." My manager knew I liked weird things, and he knew about my bone collecting, so he went over to an empty shelf, lifted up the bottom one, and showed me the entirely almost decomposed body of a mouse. And I, of course, asked for it, which proceeds to the next few minutes where I went out to almost every empty shelf with my ex-manager, lifted the bottom one up, and checked to see if there were more dead mice. We didn't find another full dead one, but I left with an extra spine and ribcage for an even more decomposed mouse, so I was happy with the find. My manager, bless him in his heart, for just going along with my weird shenanigans. For there, I started building my collection and talking about it to anyone who was interested in them. Some people were, but others were understandably not so much. My mom, for instance, hates my bone collecting, and although she doesn't make me get rid of anything from it, she does lament about how much it grosses her out. I know it's not a hobby for everyone, and I try to keep her out of the loop of it. My stepmom also isn't interested in collecting bones, only for herself. But when it comes to me, she's responsible to most of my bone collection at this point. The first time we did anything involving bones or oddities, we went to my grandparents' old property, where there was a ravine in the back of the house, deep in the woods, and I had told her about this place. We decided to go check it out, because I haven't been there in years. The reason why I wanted to show her it is because the bottom of the ravine is full of fossilized shells, and you can easily get one, completely untouched and revealed from millions of years of erosion. Sometimes you can find barnacles and shark teeth there as well. When my grandparents were building a second house in the back, they built a well for the house, they dug up a bunch of little shark teeth. I think they ended up losing them in between moves and new tenants who were living in the back of the house, because my family didn't see them, and we might have lost it after we left the house. But more people ended up living there as well, so who knows, it could have just gotten mixed up with things over time. My stepmom loves that area, and we went multiple times to get more fossilized shells after that. Though, one day she ended up surprising me. When I went to visit just before leaving for the one semester I did spend attending SCAD, she gave me a full bag of possum bones and snake skin. Then she ended up mailing me more weird things she found when she was visiting places. The best haul of bones I got was when we went to our very last visit to my grandparents' old property. This was back in August of this year, and my stepmom wanted to collect more fossilized shells, as well as see if we could find shark teeth. She has a beach-themed bar that she and my dad converted from their shed, and she likes to paint on the inside of the shells. She's a very crafty person, so she likes to make arts and crafts, and these fossilized shells, because there's so many of them, are really great canvases to work on. We got to the property and kept looking around, digging into dirt and seeing if we could find teeth. We ended up finding a lot of shells, but we didn't end up finding teeth. Some of the shells though we found were both halves, and they were like closed together and just stuffed full of like old sand. Funny enough, a crayfish had gotten itself in between one of them, so we had a little buddy for a bit before we threw him back into the water. It's in the bottom of a ravine, and the ravine has a stream, so there was a lot of little aquatic things running around in there. Gotta be careful for worms and bugs and things. We also saw frogs and stuff too, but we didn't mess around with those. We decided to travel up and down the ravine and do a very thorough search, hoping we could find something really cool. The stream isn't deep, and there are plenty of dry land to step on, and anything that was much too close to the water we didn't want to walk through, we just ended up climbing out from a shallower part of the ravine and walking along until we came across another dry patch of land inside of it. And then doing this led to the best haul of bones that we were not expecting or originally intending to find. I know weird stuff lived in that area. My dad's family has seen weird animals, and insert like many question marks in here because I have no idea what the things they describe possibly could be. One time they were talking about driving down the road and they saw what looked like a log with a bunch of little legs like walking across the road, and they had no idea what it could possibly be. I personally haven't seen anything with my own two eyes while living in this area, but I have like heard stuff outside, but I think that also could have just been like raccoons and stuff digging in our trash can. Though I have never seen a raccoon in that area, so who knows. But my dad's family has seen weird stuff. And my uncle one time caught a picture of something really weird in my grandparents' backyard. A photo that I still have a physical copy of, but the version I have is pretty ruined and hard to see after 14 years of wear and tear. Thanks, my brother, for folding the picture and purposely folding it over the fucking spot where the fucking cryptid's at. Thanks! Anyway, so why do I mention the weird cryptid things? Because we found a lot of bones. And I mean a lot. Most of them were deer bones, but we found most of a perfectly picked clean deer, a boar skull, and other miscellaneous bones, including more adult deer bones, all along the path of the ravine. The full deer and boar had bite marks on them, from something chewing on their bones, I assume, but nothing that came across worrisome. To me, it kind of looked like a squirrel got into it. So I didn't think of, like, weird cryptid animal killed a bunch of animals and ate on the bones. Like, I think it was just a squirrel just having a little chomp, or a mouse or something. If I could go back and see what cryptid thing my uncle took a photo of in the woods, I'd go and do it, because we still to this day have no idea what it could possibly be. But that trip ended with my driving home with a massive bucket of bones, and that would have been my most wild bone collecting story if it were not for the event that happened some years before the Great Bone Haul. Now, I'm going to be very vague on the location and time this happened, specifically the details for privacy's sake, as the events that happened in my point of view only correlate to the more wilder aspects of the story, as I wasn't directly involved with any of the more upsetting parts of it. I also want to mention that this whole thing was resolved, and they did find the culprit who did what I'm about to talk about. They found the original thing months after my part in this story happened, and this is just more, everything that happened afterwards just more of like, that's a coincidence, that's weird, and disturbing. So the reason why I'm going to be so vague about the details, you'll see. So this story started with TikTok. Yes, I know, that awful site, but back when this happened, I'd scroll through TikTok's For You page a lot when I was bored, and I came across a video of someone talking about how he would find animal bones where birds of prey would nest. Where I live was similar to where this person lived geographically, although not exactly the same kind of place, and some of the stuff he pointed out was near where I used to work. Vultures are common where I live, so I figured I'd give it a shot, as my bone collection was very small back then, and I was always looking for new bones. My small bone collection is nothing compared to the collection I have now, so back then I was very much wanting more bones, and I was very much willing to go looking into any place to find any animal bones I could. This stretch of woods was small and only had 2 footpaths leading into it, so I followed one of them. Then immediately turned around when I saw a group of people hanging out in tents in the woods. I don't like being around strange people I see in the woods, even on the man-made paths my town has, and I didn't want to stick around. But I stole my bones, so I head towards the other path, hoping the people in the first path didn't notice me. I don't like disturbing people, and finding a group of people in the woods, even when I'm walking down regular paths in my woods and somebody's crossing the woods into my direction, I don't like it at all. The forest can be scary, and I think the people are the scariest part of it. But unfortunately, the people on that path did notice me. I saw them as I reached the entrance of the first path, and they watched me, and it was just 2 guys. I wanted to believe that maybe they were about to go off to the nearby gas station for snacks, or somewhere else, and I tried to ignore them. The whole time texting some friends in a Discord server, telling them how weird this whole thing was. They were at the entrance of the first path when I got to the entrance of the second path, so they saw me going down the second path. I probably should have turned away, but nothing bad happened to me in this story, so you don't have to worry about that. I headed down that other path, looking at the ground for more bones, and then I turned back to the entrance of the path to see them both standing there. It was only the 2 of them, and they immediately turned and left when they realized I'd seen them, and well, I've seen enough horror movies, and I figured I pushed my luck far enough, and I am not going to test it any farther. I left, and they watched me go. The whole time I walked home, I kept checking my back to see if they were following me, but they did not. Which was very fortunate, as it's a very long walk from that area to where I live, so if they were following me, that would have been really scary. And that would have been the end of a very odd experience. I would have wondered for a long time why those guys followed me, what was so important down that path, and what would have happened if I ignored those obvious red flags and kept pushing forward. I didn't have to wonder for so long when I passed by that same spot on my way from work a month or so later to see a bunch of police cars and news station cars parked in that exact area, because it turns out there was a dead body there. Yeah, like a dead person was found in those woods, down the path that the guys followed me down. And the only reason why I know it was the same path was when later, when I was walking by that area again on my way to work, there was caution tape left at the entrance of that specific path. And they left it there, and it stayed there for months afterwards, blocking the entrance for anyone to go down. Eventually the wind or nature or whatever blew it away, but it was there for a while as a reminder. And I went home, and I told my mom the whole story, and we went on the local news to find out exactly what happened. Fortunately, the person who did kill the guy in the woods was caught, and I never went down into those woods again. And I have a really interesting, wild story to tell people now that I'm currently telling to all, like, almost 12,000 of you, so yay! At least until I get another wild bone hunting story, but I mean, I don't know, unless Mothman decides to hunt me down in the middle of the woods one night, I don't think there's anything that can get wild than, me almost getting murdered, and like an actual person getting murdered. Yeah. And those are my tales as a bone hunter. I'm sure I'll have more eventually to tell, but those are the most entertaining and disturbing ones I have at the moment. And I think it does it for today's video. Let me know if you have any bow hunting stories you want to tell yourself, or if you're interested in vulture culture. You can follow me on social medias, I have linked down below, and I have started up a Ko-fi. I also have 2 comics, The Shepherd of Oblivion and In Harmony, the latter which will have its first 5 pages posted on December 17th. If you like queer horror and college kids finding weird stuff in the woods, then this is the comic for you. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there. Bye!